She stood in that hospital corridor, tears streaming down her 13-year-old face, as the elderly millionaire in the bed before her whispered 7 words that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her life. But to understand why those words broke her, why they meant everything, we need to go back. Back 3 weeks earlier, to a girl who had nothing but was about to risk everything to save a stranger's life. Maya Rodriguez was 13 years old, and every morning began the same way. The alarm on her cracked phone screen would buzz at 5 a.m. in the tiny bedroom she shared with boxes of her grandmother's belongings in apartment 4C of the Riverside projects. The building smelled like mildew and old cooking grease, and the elevator had been broken for 8 months. But Maya would roll out of bed without complaint, her feet touching the cold linoleum floor, and pad quietly to her grandmother's room. Clara Rodriguez was 68 years old, and her hands shook slightly as Maya helped her organize the day's medications. 7 pills every morning. Maya had memorized each one. The white oval for blood pressure, the small yellow circle for diabetes, the pink capsule for her heart. Clara would smile at her granddaughter, wrinkles deepening around eyes that had seen too much hardship, and whisper thank you as if Maya were doing something extraordinary instead of simply keeping her alive. Then Maya would move to the kitchen, opening cabinets that echoed with emptiness. Some mornings there were 2 eggs left. Other mornings, just a box of generic cereal with barely enough milk to make it edible. She'd make breakfast stretch for 2 people, portions that left both of them still hungry, but neither would ever say it out loud. Clara would shuffle to the small table, and they'd eat together in the gray morning light filtering through curtains that had once been white but had faded to dingy yellow. By 6:15, Maya was out the door, her textbooks wrapped carefully in plastic grocery bags because her backpack had torn 3 months ago, and there was no money for a new one. The books couldn't get wet. She'd learned that lesson the hard way last year when rain had destroyed her math textbook, and she'd had to pay the school $42 they didn't have. Now she protected those books like they were made of gold because in a way they were her way out. At Riverside Middle School, Maya sat in the front row of every class. Her science teacher, Mr. Patterson, had noticed her immediately. While other students slouched and checked phones hidden under their desks, Maya leaned forward, absorbing every word like her life depended on it. Because it did. When Mr. Patterson talked about cells and DNA, about how the human body was this miraculous machine that could heal itself, Maya's eyes would light up with something rare in that school. Genuine wonder. She didn't have a computer at home. While her classmates completed assignments on laptops and tablets, Maya would rush to the library after school, begging the librarian for just 30 more minutes when closing time came. She'd type her essays on the public computers, sometimes with other kids waiting impatiently behind her, and she'd save everything to a battered flash drive she'd bought at a dollar store. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, not because it sounded prestigious or because she'd seen it on TV, but because when she was 9 years old and burning up with fever they couldn't afford to treat, a pediatrician at the free clinic had stayed 2 hours past closing to make sure she was okay. That woman had knelt down, looked Maya in the eyes and said, "You're going to be just fine, sweetheart." Maya had never forgotten the feeling of being seen, of matching to someone with the power to heal. During lunch period, while other students complained about the cafeteria food, Maya would carefully unwrap the sandwich she'd made that morning. The last of the bread, a thin scraping of peanut butter. She'd take small bites, making it last. And when she noticed Destiny Carter, a girl 2 grades below her, staring at the vending machines with empty pockets and emptier eyes, Maya would break her sandwich in half without a word and slide it across the table. Destiny would look up, surprised, grateful, ashamed. Maya would just smile and say she wasn't that hungry anyway. She was always hungry. On her refrigerator at home, held up by a magnet from a pizza place that had closed 3 years ago, was a notice printed on official letterhead. 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days until they'd be on the street. The rent was 4 months overdue, and the building management had run out of patience. Clara's diabetes medication cost $340 every month, and without insurance it was a choice between medicine or rent. They'd chosen medicine, and now they were paying the price. Every day after school, Maya didn't go home. She walked 6 blocks to Garcia's corner store, a cramped shop with flickering fluorescent lights and merchandise crammed on metal shelves. Mr. Garcia, a quiet man with kind eyes and tired shoulders, paid her $6 an hour in cash to sweep floors, stock shelves, and clean the bathroom that customers destroyed daily. It wasn't legal employment for a 13-year-old, and they both knew it. But Mr. Garcia never asked questions, and Maya never complained when he could only give her 20 hours a week. Every Friday, he'd hand her an envelope with bills folded inside, and Maya would pocket it like treasure, already calculating how much could go toward food, how much toward keeping the lights on for another week. On a Tuesday evening in late September, Maya finished her shift at the store and faced a decision she made every single day. Take the bus home for $2.50, or walk the 3 miles and save the fare. She chose to walk. She always chose to walk. The route took her through 2 different worlds. First, the familiar streets of her neighborhood, where men sat on stoops and music played from open windows, where everyone knew everyone's business and looked out for each other because they had to. Then, about a mile in, the world would shift. She'd cross an invisible line into Riverside Heights, where the sidewalks were smooth and uncracked, where grass grew thick and green in front of houses that could swallow her entire apartment building. Luxury cars sat in driveways like sculpture. Children her age walked past in designer sneakers, earbuds in, faces glowing in the light of the newest iPhones. Maya would walk faster through this neighborhood, head down, trying to be invisible. She felt their eyes sometimes, the way residents would glance at her worn shoes and grocery bag-wrapped books and make assumptions. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. But it was the fastest route home, and time mattered when you still had homework and Clara would need help with dinner. That particular Tuesday, Maya was exhausted. Her body ached from lifting boxes of inventory, her stomach growled with real pain, and her algebra homework wasn't going to finish itself. She stopped at a bus bench under a streetlight in the heart of Riverside Heights, telling herself she'd rest for just 5 minutes. She pulled out her textbook and notebook, using the streetlight to see, and started working through equations that blurred in front of tired eyes. The sound, when it came, shattered the quiet evening like an explosion. Tires screeching against asphalt, that horrible sound of rubber burning, trying desperately to grip the road. Maya's head snapped up just in time to see the black Mercedes swerve violently, the driver overcorrecting, the vehicle's trajectory suddenly wrong. So wrong. It happened in slow motion and all at once. The car jumped the curb, heading straight for a decorative lamppost, and the impact sent a metallic boom echoing through the street. For a moment, everything froze. Smoke or steam rose from the crumpled hood. The lamppost tilted at a sickening angle, electrical wires sparking. Then the sounds came rushing back. A car alarm wailing, someone screaming, and voices, so many voices. People emerged from houses, from other cars that had stopped. But they didn't run toward the accident. They pulled out their phones, cameras already recording, capturing the moment for social media, for views, for something to talk about later. Maya's textbook fell from her lap as she stood. Her legs moved before her brain caught up, carrying her toward the wreckage while everyone else maintained a safe distance. She could hear them now, the onlookers. Someone call 911. Oh my God. Is he okay? This is crazy. Are you getting this? But no one moved closer. No one helped. The driver's side door was jammed, but Maya could see through the spider-webbed glass. An elderly white man, silver hair, expensive suit now rumpled, slumped over the steering wheel. His face had gone gray, the color of old concrete, and his right hand clutched at his chest while his left hand scrabbled weakly at the door handle. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Maya had seen enough medical dramas at the library to recognize what she was witnessing. This wasn't just a car accident. This man was dying right in front of her. His phone was ringing. She could hear it even through the glass, a sharp digital tone repeating endlessly. The screen lit up with a name, Richard. The man's eyes, clouded with pain and fear, focused on that screen like it was a lifeline. But his fingers couldn't coordinate enough to answer. Maya tried the door. Locked. She looked around wildly. Someone help me. We need to get him out. The crowd had grown to maybe 20 people now, but they stayed back, phones held high, watching. A woman in yoga clothes shook her head. The ambulance is coming, honey. You should wait. You might hurt him worse. Others nodded agreement. Wait for the professionals. Don't get involved. Protect yourself from liability. But Maya looked back at the man, and she saw his lips turning blue. 6 months ago, the community center in her neighborhood had offered a free health and safety workshop. Most people hadn't shown up. Maya had gone, sitting in a folding chair in a room that smelled like old coffee, while a tired paramedic named Luis had taught them CPR on a plastic dummy. Count to 30 compressions, Luis had said, demonstrating on the mannequin. Hard and fast, right in the center of the chest. You might break ribs, but broken ribs heal. Dead doesn't. Maya had practiced on that dummy until her arms ached, never imagining she'd actually need to use it. The man wasn't breathing anymore. His chest had stopped moving. His hand fell away from his chest, going limp. Maya made a decision that would change her life forever. She grabbed a decorative rock from someone's landscaping and slammed it against the passenger window. The safety glass held for 1 hit, 2 hits, then spiderwebbed completely on the third. She used her jacket-covered elbow to clear enough glass to reach through and unlock the door. Someone in the crowd yelled, "What are you doing? You can't just—" But Maya was already pulling the passenger door open, climbing across the center console. Her small size an advantage in the cramped space. The man was heavy. She had to drag him by his shoulders, pulling him away from the steering wheel and the deployed airbag, laying him as flat as she could across the front seats. His eyes were half open, unseeing. Maya's hands shook as she positioned them in the center of his chest, lacing her fingers together the way Luis had taught her. She pushed down hard, counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her arms burned. The man's body was solid, resistant, and she had to use her whole body weight to compress his chest. 28, 29, 30. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths, watching to see if his chest rose. It did slightly. Back to compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. People were shouting now, some telling her to stop, others encouraging her. She heard sirens in the distance, but they sounded so far away. 26, 27, 28. Her arms felt like they would fall off. Sweat dripped into her eyes. She'd lost count and had to start over. 1, 2, 3. How long had it been? 30 seconds? A minute? Time had become meaningless, existing only in the rhythm of compressions. Push, push, push. Don't stop. Keep going. Please work. Please. And then he gasped. A horrible, rattling gasp that sucked air into starved lungs. His whole body convulsed. His eyes flew open, wild and confused, and he gasped again, this time more like a normal breath. Color started returning to his face, gray shifting to pale pink. Maya nearly collapsed on top of him in relief. "You're okay," she heard herself saying, her voice high and shaky. "You're breathing. You're okay." The paramedics arrived seconds later, a blur of navy blue uniforms and efficient movement. Strong hands pulled Maya back, out of the car, away from the man who was now coughing and trying to speak. "Good work, kid, we've got it from here," someone said. And then she was standing outside the car again, chest heaving, her hands numb. The crowd had grown larger. Some people were clapping. Others were still filming. Maya felt dizzy, disconnected, like she was watching this happen to someone else. The paramedics worked with practice speed, getting the man onto a stretcher, attaching equipment, speaking in codes Maya didn't understand. But just before they loaded him into the ambulance, the man turned his head. His eyes found Maya in the crowd, and they locked onto her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His lips moved, trying to form words, his hand reaching toward her weakly. The paramedics didn't notice, already lifting the stretcher into the ambulance, doors closing with a final thump. The sirens wailed again, and the ambulance pulled away, and the man was gone. Maya stood there, shaking, as the crowd began to disperse. The show was over. People drifted back to their houses, their cars, their interrupted evenings. A police officer approached her, middle-aged with a bored expression, pulling out a small notepad. "You're the one who did CPR?" Maya nodded. "Name?" "Maya Rodriguez." "Age?" 13. The officer's eyebrows rose slightly, but he wrote it down. "Address?" Maya gave her street, and she saw the subtle shift in his expression. He knew that neighborhood. He'd made assumptions. He took her statement in a voice that suggested this was routine paperwork. Nothing more. When she finished describing what had happened, he flipped his notepad closed and gave her a nod that felt dismissive. "You did good, kid. That was brave. Now you should probably head home. Your parents are probably worried." Maya didn't correct him about her parents. She just nodded and turned to leave. That's when she saw it. On the ground near the passenger side of the wrecked Mercedes, partially hidden under the car. A leather portfolio, rich brown leather with JW, embossed in gold on the corner. It must have fallen out when she'd opened the door, or maybe when the paramedics had extracted the man. Maya picked it up, feeling the weight of it, the quality. This was the kind of thing that cost more than her month's wages at Garcia's store. She opened it and saw papers inside, documents with legal letterhead, a checkbook, business cards that read James Whitmore, founder and CEO, Whitmore Capital. She should give it to the police officer, but he'd already walked back to his patrol car, radio in hand, dealing with other things. She looked at the portfolio again, at that embossed JW, and made a decision. She'd return it herself. Tomorrow, maybe, after school. The man, James Whitmore, whoever he was, would probably want it back. It seemed important. Maya tucked the portfolio under her arm, gathered her scattered homework and textbooks, and started walking again. Her hands were still shaking. Her whole body felt strange, flooded with adrenaline that was slowly draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She'd just saved someone's life. A real person. She'd done CPR, something she'd only practiced on a plastic dummy, and it had worked. The man had been dead or nearly dead, and now he was breathing. But as she walked through the darkening streets, past the manicured lawns and luxury cars, back toward her neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and some didn't work at all, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Something bigger than she understood. The way that man had looked at her in those final seconds before the ambulance doors closed. The intensity in his eyes. The way he'd reached for her, tried to speak. What had he wanted to say? She'd never know. She'd helped a stranger, saved his life, and now they'd go back to their separate worlds. Him to his mansion and his expensive cars. Her to apartment 4C and the eviction notice on the fridge. That was how the world worked. Maya understood that by now. If you're loving this story so far, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will completely blow your mind. She had no idea that the man she'd saved was worth $340 million. She had no idea that his son would soon be investigating her family, looking for reasons to keep them apart. She had no idea that in 3 weeks, she'd be standing in a hospital corridor, tears streaming down her face, as James Whitmore whispered the words that would shatter her world and rebuild it all at once. But that night, Maya just walked home, climbed the 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was still broken, and quietly let herself into the apartment. Clara was asleep in her chair, the TV flickering with late-night news. Maya covered her grandmother with a thin blanket, made sure her medications were set out for the morning, and finally collapsed on her own bed. She fell asleep with the leather portfolio on her nightstand, the embossed JW, catching the streetlight from outside her window. Tomorrow she'd figure out how to return it. Tomorrow she'd go back to normal life. Tonight, she'd just be a 13-year-old girl who'd done something impossible. What would you have done in Maya's situation? Would you have risked everything to save a stranger? Or would you have waited for help to arrive? Drop your answer in the comments below. Jennifer Whitmore stood frozen in that marble lobby, watching a 13-year-old girl disappear through the revolving doors with tears streaming down her face. Something about the image wouldn't leave her mind. The way the girl had held herself together until the very end. The way she'd clutched that $100 bill like it burned her hand. The devastation in her eyes when Richard had dismissed her. Jennifer had seen that look before, in the mirror years ago, when their father had been too busy for her school play, too occupied for her graduation, too focused on deals and mergers to notice his own daughter. She pulled out her phone and called the hospital before she could talk herself out of it. James answered on the second ring, his voice still rough but alert. "Jennifer? Everything okay? Dad, the girl who saved you. She was just here." Richard sent her away. The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. Then James's voice came back, low and dangerous in a way Jennifer hadn't heard in years. "He did what?" Jennifer explained it all. How the girl had come to return the portfolio, how Richard had interrogated her about copying documents, how he'd handed her cash like a tip and dismissed her. She described the tears, the humiliation, the way this child had looked so small and broken in their enormous lobby. "Get me her name," James said, and there was something different in his voice. Not the cold calculation Jennifer had grown up with, but something raw, almost desperate. "Get me her information. I don't care what you have to do. Find her." Jennifer rushed to the security desk, demanded the sign-in sheet, and there it was. Maya Rodriguez, age 13, an address in the Riverside Projects. She texted the information to her father and then stood there in that gleaming lobby, looking at the revolving doors where Maya had disappeared, and felt ashamed of her family in a way she never had before. Back at the hospital, James was already on the phone with his private investigator, the same one he'd used 100 times for background checks on business rivals and potential acquisitions. But this time was different. "I need everything on a Maya Rodriguez, 13 years old, lives in the Riverside Projects. But I don't want dirt. I want the truth. I want to know who she is, what her life is like, what she needs. And I want it today." Richard arrived at the hospital an hour later, portfolio in hand, looking pleased with himself. "Got your documents back, Dad. All accounted for." The kid hadn't touched anything. James looked at his son, really looked at him and saw himself. Saw the man he'd been for 40 years. Suspicious, transactional, incapable of seeing people as anything other than assets or threats. The realization hit him like another heart attack. "You gave her $100. Richard shrugged. "She returned valuable property. I tipped her appropriately. She saved my life, Richard. She's 13 years old, and she saved my life while grown adults stood around filming it on their phones. And you treated her like hired help. Dad, you're being emotional. It's the medication. These people, they see an opportunity and they take it." She probably heard about the accident, found the portfolio, and figured she could leverage it for a payday. James felt rage building in his chest, hot and clean. "Get out." Richard blinked. "What?" "Get out of my room. Get out of this hospital. I don't want to see you right now." "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. The deal we talked about, it needs your signature by—" "I said get out." James's voice rose, strong enough that a nurse poked her head in, concerned. Richard stood there, shocked, then grabbed his briefcase and left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Jennifer, who'd arrived just in time to witness the confrontation, sat down beside her father's bed. "I'm sorry. I should have come down to the lobby faster. I should have been there instead of him." James took his daughter's hand, and she was surprised to feel his fingers trembling. "I died, Jennifer. I actually died. My heart stopped, my lungs stopped, and I was gone. And a 13-year-old child I'd never met brought me back. Do you know what that does to a person? Do you know what it means to be given a second chance you didn't earn and didn't deserve?" Jennifer had never heard her father talk like this. James Whitmore didn't do vulnerability. He didn't do introspection. He moved forward, always forward, crushing obstacles and accumulating wealth. But the man in this hospital bed looked different. Older, yes, but also somehow more human. "I've spent 40 years building an empire," James continued, his voice quiet now. 40 years being ruthless, being the man who never loses, being the man who sees everything as a transaction. And you know what I have to show for it? Money. Buildings with my name on them. A son who thinks a human life is worth a $100 tip. Dad. No, let me finish. I grew up poor, Jennifer. Did you know that? I don't think I ever told you. My mother cleaned houses 6 days a week just to keep us fed. We lived in a place not much different from where Maya Rodriguez lives now. And I clawed my way out of that poverty by being harder, smarter, more ruthless than everyone else. I told myself I'd never be vulnerable again. Never be powerless. Never be that scared little boy who couldn't help his mother. Jennifer squeezed his hand, seeing her father clearly for the first time in years. But somewhere along the way, James said, I forgot where I came from. I forgot what it's like to struggle, to be scared, to need help. I started donating to opera houses and art museums, things that made me look cultured and sophisticated, things that got my name on plaques in lobbies where people like me would see them. When's the last time I did something for someone who actually needed it? Someone like Maya? Someone like my mother was. The private investigator's report arrived 2 hours later, and James read it 3 times, each time feeling the weight in his chest grow heavier. Maya Rodriguez, 13 years old, honor roll student at Riverside Middle School despite having no computer at home. Living with her grandmother Clara Rodriguez in a 2-bedroom apartment in the projects. 20 days from eviction. Mother deceased. Father unknown. Clara had diabetes. Medical bills exceeding $15,000. Medication costs of $340 per month they couldn't afford. Maya worked at Garcia's corner store for $6 an hour cash, under the table because she was too young for legal employment. Teacher reports described her as brilliant, determined, one of the brightest students they'd ever taught, but recently struggling, falling asleep in class, grades slipping. There was more. Maya had been accepted to a gifted summer program at the state university last year but couldn't attend because there was no money for transportation or materials. She'd won a science fair in 6th grade with a project about diabetes management, inspired by her grandmother's condition. Her dream, according to a school counselor's notes, was to become a doctor and open a clinic in her neighborhood for people who couldn't afford regular health care. James set down the report and stared out the hospital window at the city skyline, seeing it differently now. Somewhere out there in those buildings and streets was a 13-year-old girl who should have been his son, should have been his legacy. Smart, determined, selfless. Everything he'd once been before ambition had calcified into cruelty. He picked up his phone and made a call. Jennifer, I need you to do something for me. The next morning, Maya went to Garcia's store for her shift, the $100 bill hidden in her sock because she didn't trust leaving it in the apartment. She planned to get it converted to smaller bills later, something less conspicuous. Mr. Garcia was behind the counter, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Maya, you got a visitor, he said, gesturing to the back office. Maya's stomach dropped. Was it truancy officers? Someone from social services? Had Richard Whitmore reported her for something? She walked to the back office on shaking legs and found Jennifer Whitmore sitting in Mr. Garcia's cluttered office, looking wildly out of place in her expensive suit among the boxes of inventory and outdated filing cabinets. Please don't run, Jennifer said immediately, standing up. I just want to talk. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Maya stayed in the doorway, ready to bolt. Why are you here? My father wants to meet you, properly this time. He wants to apologize for what Richard did, and he wants to thank you for saving his life. I don't need his thanks, Maya said, and she was surprised by how much she meant it. The anger from yesterday had crystallized into something harder, colder. Tell your father I'm glad he's okay, but we're done here. Maya, please. He's not what you think. He's not Richard. Isn't he? Maya's voice rose. I looked him up. James Whitmore, the man who never loses. The ruthless businessman who destroys companies and doesn't care who gets hurt. He gives millions to opera houses but nothing to people who actually need help. And his son is exactly like him, treating people like me like we're trying to scam him. Jennifer flinched but didn't argue. You're right. About all of it. My father has been a lot of things, most of them not good. But I've never seen him like he is now. Whatever happened when you saved him, it changed something. He keeps saying you gave him a second chance, and he wants to do something meaningful with it. He can do something meaningful, Maya said bitterly. He can donate to free clinics or community programs or scholarship funds. He doesn't need me for that. But he does, Jennifer said softly, because he doesn't know how. He's been so far removed from real struggle for so long that he doesn't even know where to start. He reads your file. He has a file on me? Maya's voice went sharp with betrayal. He needed to understand your situation. Maya, he knows about the eviction, about your grandmother's medical bills, about everything you're dealing with. And he wants to help. I don't want his charity. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, feeling exposed, violated. This rich man she'd never spoken to had investigated her. Knew all her secrets, all her failures, all the ways she was barely hanging on. It's not charity, Jennifer said. My father wants to create a scholarship fund, and he wants you to be the first recipient. You'd have to maintain your grades, do community service, write quarterly reports. You'd earn it, Maya, every penny. And he wants to hire you as a youth advisor for a foundation he's creating, legitimate employment with a real salary. Everything above board, everything documented. You'd be an employee, not a charity case. Maya wanted to say no, wanted to walk away with her pride intact, wanted to prove she didn't need anyone, could do this all herself. But the numbers in her head wouldn't stop. 20 days to eviction, $340 for medication, $62 in her pocket, a grandmother who was getting sicker every day. Pride was expensive and Maya couldn't afford it. Why? She asked finally. Why would he do this? Jennifer smiled sadly. Because you reminded him of something he forgot a long time ago. And because someone should have done it for him when he was your age, struggling and scared and alone. Make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. Maya went to the hospital that evening after her shift, still wearing her Garcia's Corner Store polo shirt that smelled like floor cleaner and stale coffee. Jennifer met her in the lobby and rode the elevator up with her, making small talk that Maya barely heard through the pounding of her heart. They reached the private wing, walked down a hallway that smelled like expensive cleaning products and fresh flowers, and stopped at room 407. James Whitmore was sitting up in bed, looking smaller somehow than Maya had expected. Older, human, not the titan of industry from the Forbes articles, just an elderly man in a hospital gown who'd nearly died. When he saw Maya in the doorway, his face transformed. His eyes filled with tears, and he held out a hand that trembled slightly. Maya, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you for coming. Maya stood frozen, unsure what to do, what to say. Jennifer gently guided her to a chair beside the bed, then quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. I'm sorry, James said immediately, for what my son did, for how he treated you. That was unforgivable. Maya didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. I've been thinking a lot, James continued, about my life, about what matters, about what kind of man I want to be with whatever time I have left. And I keep coming back to you. Me? You didn't hesitate, James said. When everyone else was watching, filming, treating my death as entertainment, you ran toward danger. You saved my life. And when you found my portfolio, you could have sold it, could have leveraged it for money, could have done 100 different things that would have benefited you. But instead you returned it because it was the right thing to do. Anyone would have. No. James's voice was firm. Not anyone. Most people wouldn't. Most people would have calculated the risk, the benefit, what they stood to gain or lose. You just did what was right because it was right. Do you know how rare that is? Maya thought about the crowd with their phones, about Richard Whitmore's suspicion, about the way the world had taught her that goodness was for people who could afford it. Not that rare, she said quietly. James smiled, and it transformed his face into something gentle, grandfatherly. I grew up like you, Maya, poor, scared, fighting for everything. My mother worked herself to death trying to give me opportunities. And I made it out, but I lost something in the process. I became hard, ruthless. I forgot that the point of success isn't just accumulating wealth. It's using that wealth to help people who are where I used to be. He told her his whole story then. Growing up in poverty, his mother's sacrifices, the way he'd clawed his way up through ruthless determination, the deals he'd made, the people he'd hurt, the way money had insulated him from real human connection. He talked about seeing his son treat Maya with casual cruelty and recognizing himself, recognizing what he'd become. I want to change, James said. And I want you to help me. I don't understand, Maya said. Jennifer told you about the scholarship and the foundation position. That's all true. But it's more than that. I don't want to just throw money at problems from a distance. I want to actually help, meaningfully help the community you come from. And I don't know how to do that anymore. I've forgotten what real struggle looks like. But you know, you live it every day. James explained his vision. A foundation focused on the riverside projects and neighborhoods like it. Medical clinics for people without insurance. After-school programs. Scholarships for kids like Maya. Job training. Housing assistance. Everything he'd never thought to fund before because it didn't come with a gala and a plaque. I want you to be part of building this, he said. Not just as a recipient, but as a voice. You know what your community needs better than any consultant I could hire. You know what actually helps versus what just looks good on paper. Maya sat there, overwhelmed. This was beyond anything she'd imagined. This was a chance to change not just her life but the lives of everyone she knew. Everyone struggling like her grandmother, like Mr. Garcia, like Destiny who'd mocked her clothes but only because Destiny was struggling too. What if I fail? Maya asked, her voice small. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't do this? James reached out and took her hand, and Maya was surprised by the warmth of it, the realness. Maya, you brought a man back from death with nothing but what you learned in a free workshop. You work impossible hours, maintain honor roll, take care of your grandmother, and still find the strength to share your lunch with another hungry kid. If that's not good enough, I don't know what is. Something broke open in Maya's chest. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the weight she'd been carrying alone suddenly had somewhere to go. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. My grandmother needs medication. We're getting evicted. I'm so tired all the time, and I don't know how much longer I can keep going. Then stop carrying it alone, James said gently. Let me help. Not because you owe me or because you're charity, but because someone should have helped me when I was where you are now. Consider it paying forward what I never got. They talked for hours. About Maya's dreams of medical school, about James's regrets, about what the foundation could be. James shared his own story of struggle, making himself vulnerable in a way he never had before. Maya told him about Clara, about Mr. Garcia, about Mr. Patterson, about all the people in her world who were good and kind and deserving of help. When Maya finally left the hospital that night, Jennifer was waiting in the lobby with an envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000. For immediate needs, Jennifer said. Your grandmother's medication, rent, groceries, whatever you need. Consider it an advance on your first month's salary as a foundation consultant. Maya stared at the check, at more money than she'd ever seen at once. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come back tomorrow, Jennifer said with a smile. We have a lot of work to do. Maya took the bus home, the check carefully folded in her pocket, and climbed those 4 flights of stairs with legs that felt lighter than they had in months. Clara was in her chair, and Maya knelt beside her, taking her grandmother's weathered hands in hers. Grandma, I need to tell you something. Something amazing just happened. She explained everything. The hospital visit, James's offer, the foundation, the scholarship, the check in her pocket. Clara listened with tears streaming down her face, pulling Maya into an embrace that smelled like home. Your mama would be so proud of you, baby, Clara whispered. Not because you got lucky, but because you stayed good even when the world gave you every reason not to be. That's the real miracle here. Over the next week, Maya's world transformed. The $5,000 paid 3 months of back rent, bought Clara's medication with months to spare, filled their refrigerator for the first time Maya could remember. The eviction notice came down from the fridge. Clara's hands stopped shaking as her blood sugar stabilized. Maya could breathe again. But more than that, James kept his word. Lawyers drew up contracts for the scholarship, legitimate and binding. Maya became the first recipient of the Second Chances Scholarship Fund, with a stipend for school supplies, a new laptop, money for programs and activities. She was officially hired as a youth consultant for the Second Chances Foundation, with a real salary, tax documents, everything proper and legal. James was released from the hospital, and his first stop was the Riverside projects. He showed up at apartment 4C with Jennifer, looking nervous in a way billionaires probably rarely felt. Clara answered the door, took one look at this elderly white man, and knew exactly who he was. "Mr. Whitmore," she said with quiet dignity. "Come in." They sat in that small living room with its thrift store furniture and water-stained ceiling, and James Whitmore, for the first time in 40 years, saw poverty not as an abstraction or a statistic but as the lived reality of people he cared about. He saw the way the apartment was spotlessly clean despite being falling apart. Saw the medications lined up carefully on the kitchen counter. Saw the way Clara held herself with pride even though she had nothing. "Mrs. Rodriguez," James said, "your granddaughter saved my life, not just physically but in every way that matters. She reminded me of my mother, of who I used to be, of what's actually important. I want to help if you'll let me." Clara looked at him for a long moment, assessing. Then she smiled. "My Maya told me what you're planning. This foundation. You're really going to help our neighborhood." "With Maya's guidance, yes. I want to do it right this time." Clara nodded slowly. "Then I'll say the same thing I told Maya. Pride is fine, but sometimes accepting help is the brave thing. Sometimes letting people give back is giving them a gift too. You do right by my granddaughter, Mr. Whitmore. You do right by our community. And we'll be grateful for the chance to help you remember who you were before the money changed you." James felt tears prickling his eyes for the second time that week. "Thank you," he managed. He looked at Maya, sitting beside her grandmother, and saw his own mother in Clara, saw himself in Maya. Saw what could have been if someone had given him a hand up instead of just obstacles to overcome. Saw what still could be, what he could make of his second chance. "Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have something to tell you. Something I should have said the first time I saw you in that hospital corridor. But I was too weak and medicated to get the words out." Maya looked at him, confused. "Okay." James reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a necklace, simple silver with a pendant shaped like a heart. "This was my mother's. The only nice thing she ever owned. She wore it every day until she died, and I've carried it with me since then, a reminder of where I came from. I want you to have it." "Mr. Whitmore, I can't." "Please," James said. "My mother never got to see me succeed. She worked herself to death before I made any real money. I've spent 40 years wishing I could have given her something, wishing she could have seen that her sacrifices mattered. Wearing this reminds me of her, yes, but it also reminds me of everything I've lost in the pursuit of success. When I look at you, I see her. I see the person I should have been. And I want you to have this because you're the daughter I wish I'd raised. You're the legacy I should have built." Maya took the necklace with trembling hands. Clara helped her put it on, and it sat against her heart, warm and solid and real. James walked slowly toward Maya, and she stood up, uncertain. He opened his arms, and she stepped into them, letting the stranger who'd become something more embrace her. He held her gently, like she was precious, like she mattered. And then he leaned close and whispered 7 words that Maya would carry with her for the rest of her life. 7 words that explained everything, that changed everything. But you'll have to keep watching to find out what he said, because we're not there yet. There's more story to tell, more transformation to witness, more proof that sometimes the people who have everything need saving just as much as the people who have nothing. What would you do if you suddenly had a chance to change not just your own life but your entire community? Would you be brave enough to take it? Let us know in the comments below. Maya went back to school the next week, and everything was different. Not just because she had new clothes and a laptop and textbooks that weren't falling apart, but because she carried herself differently. She wasn't the poor kid anymore, wasn't the girl everyone pitied or mocked. She was Maya Rodriguez, youth consultant for the Second Chances Foundation, scholar, someone with a voice that mattered. Mr. Patterson noticed immediately. He pulled her aside after class, beaming. "Maya, I heard about what happened, about the foundation. I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," Maya said. "And Mr. Patterson? I'm sorry I snapped at you before. When you tried to help, I was scared and proud and stupid." "You were surviving," he corrected gently. "And now you're thriving. Keep it up." Even Destiny approached her at lunch, looking uncomfortable. "Hey, Maya. I heard about everything. And I'm sorry. For the stuff I said about your clothes and everything. That was messed up." Maya could have been cruel, could have thrown the apology back in her face. Instead, she remembered why Destiny had always been so mean. Because Destiny was struggling too. Because putting others down had made her feel less small. "It's okay," Maya said. "Want to sit?" They sat together, two girls from the same neighborhood, and talked. Really talked. And Maya learned that Destiny's mother was working 3 jobs, that Destiny was taking care of her younger siblings, that the meanness had been armor against her own pain. When Maya mentioned the Foundation's after-school program they were planning, Destiny's eyes lit up. You think my little brother could get in? He's smart, but he's falling behind because nobody's home to help with homework." "Give me his name," Maya said. "I'll make sure he gets a spot." This was what the Foundation could be, Maya realized. Not just money thrown at problems, but real solutions for real people. She started making lists. What her neighborhood needed, what would actually help versus what just sounded good. James met with her twice a week, taking notes, asking questions, actually listening. Together they designed programs that made sense. The Foundation broke ground on its first project 6 weeks later, a medical clinic in the heart of the Riverside projects, offering free and low-cost care. Maya spoke at the ceremony, her voice shaking but strong, wearing that silver necklace and believing for the first time that her life could be more than survival, that she could be more than her circumstances. James stood beside her, proud, transformed. Richard wasn't there. He'd resigned from the company board after a final argument with his father, unable to accept that James was wasting money on people who, in Richard's words, wouldn't appreciate it. But Jennifer was there, and she squeezed Maya's hand as the first shovel hit the dirt. The story spread. Local news picked it up. Millionaire saved by Teen Creates Foundation to give back. Then national news. People magazine did a feature. Maya's face was suddenly everywhere, and it was overwhelming and terrifying and amazing all at once. But through it all, Maya stayed grounded. She still went to school, still helped Clara with her medications, still worked a few hours at Garcia's store because Mr. Garcia had been good to her when nobody else was. She didn't forget where she came from or who she'd been just days before James Whitmore had walked back into her life. The Foundation grew. A second clinic opened. Scholarship programs expanded. After-school tutoring started, employing local teachers and giving kids like Maya a safe place to learn. Job training programs, housing assistance, everything James had never thought to fund before because he'd forgotten what it meant to struggle. And Maya was at the center of it all, the voice that kept them honest, kept them focused on real needs instead of feel-good photo opportunities. She was 13 years old and changing her community, proving that you don't have to be old or rich or powerful to make a difference. You just have to care enough to try. 6 months passed. The eviction crisis was over. Clara was healthy. Maya was thriving in school with straight A's and college recruiters already paying attention even though she was only in 8th grade. The Foundation had helped over 500 families. Lives were changing. Hope was returning to neighborhoods that had forgotten what it felt like. James threw a celebration at the community center. Not the fancy galas he was used to, but a real party with real people. Families from the Riverside projects, kids from the after-school programs, teachers, social workers, everyone who'd been touched by the Foundation's work. Maya stood in the center of it all, watching Destiny's little brother playing with other kids who were all thriving now, watching Mr. Garcia talking proudly about the employee training program that had helped 3 of his neighbors get real jobs, watching Clara laugh with other elderly women whose medication was no longer a choice between eating and surviving. James found her in the crowd. He was older now, grayer, moving more slowly, but his eyes had light in them that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "Can I steal you for a minute?" he asked. They walked outside, away from the noise and celebration, and stood under the streetlight where Maya had once done homework, exhausted and alone. Felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm dying," James said matter-of-factly. "The doctors told me yesterday. My heart is giving out. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year if I'm lucky." Maya's world lurched. No, you just got here. We just started. Hey!" James put his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. Listen to me. I'm not afraid. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of death because I know I've done something that matters. Because of you, Maya. You saved my life twice. Once on that street, and once in every moment since. Tears streamed down Maya's face. I don't want you to go. I know, sweetheart. I don't want to go either. But we all run out of time eventually. The question is what we do with the time we have. He pulled her into an embrace, and Maya buried her face in his shoulder. This man who'd become the grandfather she'd never had, the father figure she'd always needed. They stood there in the amber glow of the streetlight, and James held her while she cried. When she finally pulled back, he wiped her tears with his thumb, gentle and paternal. There's something I need to tell you, James said. Something I've been carrying for months now. Do you remember that day in the hospital, the first real conversation we had? Maya nodded. I told you then that you reminded me of someone, and I meant it. But it's more than that. James took a deep breath, preparing himself. When I was 18 years old, before I had any money, before I became the man you read about in those articles, I fell in love. Her name was Angela. She was beautiful, kind, everything good in the world. And I got her pregnant. Maya's eyes widened. I was terrified, James continued, his voice thick with old regret. I was poor, ambitious, desperate to escape poverty, and I saw that baby as an anchor that would drag me down. So I did the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I left. I told Angela I wanted nothing to do with her or the child. I gave her some money and disappeared, threw myself into building my empire, and I never looked back. Mr. Whitmore. I tried to find her years later, after I'd made my first million, thinking I could fix it with money. But Angela had died, and the child, a daughter, had been adopted. I hired investigators, spent years searching, but the records were sealed. I never found her, never got to apologize or make things right. James's voice broke. That guilt has haunted me every day of my life. Maya understood where this was going, felt it in her bones before he said the words. Your mother's name was Angela Rodriguez, James said. I didn't know for sure until I had the investigators dig deeper, until I saw the birth certificate, the sealed adoption records, all of it. Maya, you're my granddaughter. You're the legacy I thought I'd lost forever. When you saved my life on that street, you had no idea you were saving your own grandfather. The world tilted. Maya couldn't breathe, couldn't think. That's not possible. DNA test confirms it, James said gently. I had it done weeks ago, waiting for the right time to tell you. I'm so sorry, Maya. Sorry I wasn't there for your mother. Sorry she died never knowing her father cared. Sorry you grew up in poverty while I lived in mansions. I can't change any of that. But I can be here now, for whatever time I have left. Maya sank down onto the bench, the same bench where she'd been sitting when James's car had crashed. The coincidence was too much, the universe too strange. My whole life, she whispered. I wondered about my grandfather. Clara never talked about him. My mom died before she could tell me anything. And he's been you all along. Yes, James said, sitting beside her. And when I whispered to you in that hospital corridor, when I first saw you standing there, I wanted to tell you then. But I was too weak, too medicated. All I could manage was. But Maya never got to hear what he'd whispered in that moment. Because that's a story for the final chapter. For now, she sat beside her grandfather under a streetlight in the Riverside projects. And they held hands. Two people connected by blood and choice, by tragedy and redemption, by everything that had been lost and everything that could still be found. What do you think James whispered to Maya that first day in the hospital? Comment your theories below, and then stick around for the final part of this incredible story. 3 days after that humiliating encounter at the Whitmore Capitol Tower, Maya was back at Garcia's corner store, pushing a mop across floors that never seemed to get truly clean no matter how hard she scrubbed. The $100 bill was already spent. $40 for Clara's partial medication refill, enough to get her through 2 weeks instead of the full month. $30 for groceries that would last maybe 10 days if they were careful. $20 tucked away for next month's impossible rent. $10 for bus fare so Maya could get to work and school without walking 3 miles each way in shoes that were developing holes. The math never added up. It never would. Maya had accepted this as a fundamental truth of her existence. She could work as hard as humanly possible and still fall short, still sink deeper, still watch the eviction deadline creep closer with the inevitability of a ticking clock. 17 days left now. 17 days until she and Clara would be on the street, their meager possessions in garbage bags, joining the invisible population of homeless people the city pretended not to see. She was thinking about this, pushing dirty water across linoleum, when the bell above the store's entrance chimed. Maya didn't look up immediately. She'd learned not to make eye contact with customers, especially the ones who came in late afternoon, already irritated from their day, looking for someone to take it out on. She just kept mopping, working her way toward the back of the store. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Maya Rodriguez." The voice stopped her cold. Maya knew that voice. She'd heard it exactly once, rough and desperate, gasping for air on a street in Riverside Heights. She looked up slowly, not quite believing what her ears were telling her, and dropped her mop. It clattered against the floor, dirty water spreading across the tiles she just cleaned. But Maya couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was seeing. James Whitmore stood in the doorway of Garcia's corner store, looking wildly out of place in his expensive suit among the cramped aisles of discount groceries and lottery ticket advertisements. He was thinner than he'd been in the photos she'd seen online, moving carefully like his body was still healing, but it was unmistakably him. The man whose life she'd saved, the millionaire whose son had dismissed her like trash. Here, in her store, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Maya," he said again, and there was something in his voice that made her throat tight. Relief? Recognition? Something else? Mr. Garcia emerged from behind the counter, protective instincts activated by the presence of this obvious stranger. This man who clearly didn't belong in their neighborhood. "Can I help you?" His tone suggested that help was the last thing he was offering. "I'm here to see Maya," James said, not taking his eyes off her. "If she's willing to talk to me." Maya found her voice finally, though it came out smaller than she intended. "It's okay, Mr. Garcia. I know him." Mr. Garcia looked between them, clearly skeptical, but nodded slowly. "You need me, you holler. I'll be right here." The unspoken message was clear. "I'm watching him." James took a cautious step forward, and Maya saw him wince slightly, his hand going to his ribs. The ribs she'd cracked performing CPR. "Broken ribs heal," that paramedic Luis had said. "Dead doesn't." Maya had saved this man's life and injured him in the process. And now he was standing in her store, looking at her like she was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. "Can we talk?" James asked. "Please. Just 5 minutes." Maya wanted to say no, wanted to tell him to leave, to go back to his world of glass towers and dismissive sons, to stop making her life more complicated than it already was. But something in his face stopped her. He looked humbled, nervous even, like he was the one who didn't belong, the one asking for something he had no right to request. "My shift ends in 10 minutes, Maya heard herself saying. "There's a curb out front." James nodded, looking grateful, and carefully made his way back outside. Maya finished the last 10 minutes of her shift in a daze, putting away cleaning supplies, washing her hands 3 times because they wouldn't stop shaking. Mr. Garcia watched her with concerned eyes but didn't ask questions, just handed her the small envelope with her day's wages and squeezed her shoulder. "You sure you're okay, Mija?" "I don't know," Maya admitted, "but I need to find out." She found James sitting on the curb outside the store, right there on the dirty concrete where people tossed cigarette butts and spilled drinks, his expensive suit pants getting dusty, and he didn't seem to care. He looked up when Maya emerged, and she saw something in his face that looked almost like fear, like he was afraid she wouldn't come, afraid she'd reject him, afraid of something a man with $340 million shouldn't have any reason to fear. Maya sat down beside him, maintaining a careful distance, her backpack clutched in her lap like a shield. They made an odd pair. A 13-year-old girl in worn clothes sitting next to an elderly millionaire on a curb outside a corner store in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. People walking past stared. A couple of teenagers whistled. Maya ignored them all, waiting for James to speak. I'm sorry, he said finally, and the words seemed to cost him something. For what my son did. For how he treated you. I didn't know about it until Jennifer told me, and when I found out, he shook his head, anger tightening his jaw. That's not how you save someone's life. That's not how you treat a human being who asked for nothing and gave everything. Maya didn't know what to say to that, so she stayed quiet. James turned to look at her, really look at her, and Maya felt seen in a way that was uncomfortable and profound. You saved my life, he said softly. You brought me back from death when I had maybe 30 seconds left, when everyone else was just standing there watching. And I never got to thank you properly. I never got to tell you what that means. You're welcome, Maya said automatically. The words people are taught to say, meaningless and inadequate. No, James said. That's not enough. I want to know who you are. The person who saved me. I want to understand what kind of 13-year-old runs toward danger instead of away from it, what kind of person returns a valuable portfolio instead of selling it, what kind of human being exists in this world that I've apparently forgotten all about. Maya felt something crack open in her chest, some defensive wall she'd built brick by brick over 13 years of struggle. What do you want me to say? That I'm special? I'm not. I'm just a kid from the projects who learned CPR at a free workshop because I had nothing better to do that day. I returned your portfolio because my grandmother raised me not to steal. That's it. That's all there is. I don't believe that, James said gently. Tell me about yourself. About your life. I want to know. And maybe it was the exhaustion, or the fact that he'd shown up at her store instead of summoning her to his tower, or the way he was sitting on a dirty curb like it didn't matter, but Maya started talking. She told him about Clara, about her mother dying when she was 3, about not knowing her father or her grandparents on that side. She told him about the eviction notice, about Clara's diabetes and the medication they couldn't afford, about working at Garcia's store and falling asleep in class and the constant, crushing weight of trying to survive. James listened without interrupting, without offering solutions or advice, just listening in a way that Maya suspected he hadn't done in decades. She could see it in his face, the way each detail landed, the way he flinched when she mentioned having to choose between medication and rent, the way his eyes got bright when she talked about sharing her lunch with Destiny. What are your dreams? James asked when she finally stopped talking. If money wasn't an issue, if you could do anything, be anything, what would you choose? Maya had been asked this question exactly once before by Mr. Patterson during a career day presentation in 6th grade. She'd given him the safe answer then, the one that sounded good but didn't reveal too much hope because hope was dangerous when you couldn't afford it. But something about sitting on this curb with this man who'd nearly died made her tell the truth. I'd finish school, she said. All the way through. High school, college, medical school. I'd become a doctor. Not the kind who works in fancy hospitals treating rich people, but the kind who opens a clinic in neighborhoods like this, who treats people who can't afford insurance, who remembers what it's like to be scared and poor and sick. I'd help people who look like me, who come from where I come from, who never get help because the system isn't built for them. She stopped, embarrassed by how much she'd revealed, how naive it sounded. A poor black girl from the projects becoming a doctor. It was the kind of dream that made people smile sadly and pat your head and tell you to be realistic. But James wasn't smiling sadly. He was staring at her with an intensity that made Maya's breath catch. You know what I see when I look at you? He asked. Maya shook her head, not trusting her voice. I see myself, James said. 45 years ago, before the money, before the success, before I forgot what it was like to be hungry and scared and desperate. I had that same ambition, that same fire, that same absolute determination to claw my way out of poverty no matter what it took. And I did it. I made it out. But somewhere along the way, I lost the compassion part. I lost the part about helping people who look like me, who come from where I came from. I just kept accumulating more and more, building higher walls between myself and the world I'd escaped, until I couldn't even see people like you anymore. You were just abstractions, statistics, problems someone else should solve. He paused, and Maya saw tears gathering in his eyes. You saved my life, Maya. But more than that, you reminded me of who I used to be. You showed me what I've lost. And I want to help you, if you'll let me. Maya's defenses shot back up immediately. I don't need charity. Good, James said firmly. Because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering an opportunity. A chance. The same chance I wish someone had given me when I was where you are now. He explained quickly, efficiently, the way a man who'd built an empire explained business deals. He'd cover the eviction, pay Claire's medical bills, get them out of immediate crisis. But that was just the beginning. I don't want to just hand you money and walk away feeling good about myself, he said. That's not help. That's just easing my own guilt. I want to invest in you, Maya. In your future. In your potential. Maya listened, suspicious but unable to stop hope from creeping into her chest like sunlight through a crack. Here's what I'm proposing, James continued. I want to create a scholarship fund. Not just for you, but for kids like you. Kids who have the grades, the drive, the potential, but not the resources. You'll be the first recipient. But to keep the scholarship, you'll have to maintain your grades, do community service, write quarterly reports about your progress. You'll earn it, Maya. Every penny. This isn't charity. This is recognition of your worth and an investment in what you can become. Maya's mind was racing, trying to find the catch, the hidden cost, the way this would go wrong. Why? She asked. Why would you do this? Because someone should have, James said simply. When I was your age, struggling the way you're struggling, no one helped. I did it alone and it made me hard. It made me ruthless. It turned me into someone who could look at people suffering and see it as someone else's problem. I don't want that for you. You have something I lost. Genuine compassion. The ability to see another person's pain and respond to it. The world needs more doctors like the one you want to be. And I need to do this. I need to help you not just for your sake, but for mine. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because what Maya decides next will change everything, and you won't want to miss a single moment. Maya sat there trying to process what she was hearing. A scholarship, real support, a chance to actually achieve her dreams instead of just surviving another day. It sounded too good to be true, and Maya had learned the hard way that things that sounded too good to be true usually were. There's more, James said, and Maya's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought. The catch. I want to create a foundation. A real one, not just another vanity project where rich people give money to things that make them look good. I want to focus on neighborhoods like this one, on real problems. Healthcare access, education, job training, housing assistance. All the things I ignored for decades while I was busy making money. He turned to face her fully. But I don't know how to do it right, Maya. I'm so far removed from actual struggle that I'd probably just throw money at problems without understanding what people really need. I need someone who knows this world, who understands what actually helps versus what just looks good in a press release. I want to hire you as a youth consultant. Legitimate employment, real salary, everything legal and documented. During the school year, it would just be a few hours a week. During summers, it could be more. You'd help me design programs that actually work, that actually help. You'd be my connection to reality. Maya couldn't breathe. This was insane. This was impossible. 13-year-olds didn't get hired as consultants by millionaires. Poor kids from the projects didn't get scholarships and job offers and chances to change their entire lives. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. I know it sounds crazy, James said, reading her expression. I know you have no reason to trust me. My son treated you like garbage. I'm a stranger who showed up at your job and is making promises that probably sound too big to be real. But I'm asking you to take a chance. Take a chance on me the same way you took a chance when you ran toward my car instead of away from it. Take a chance on the possibility that sometimes good things can happen, that sometimes people can change, that sometimes the universe balances the scales. Why me? Maya whispered. There are thousands of kids like me. Tens of thousands. Why am I the one you're helping? James smiled, sad and knowing. Because you're the one who saved my life. Because in that moment when I was dying, you were the only one who acted. And because when I look at you, I see what I could have been if someone had helped me stay human. You have ambition, Maya, just like I did. But you also have heart. You share your lunch with hungry kids. You take care of your grandmother. You work yourself to exhaustion and still maintain honor roll. You returned my portfolio even though you desperately needed money. You're everything I should have been and wasn't. He held out his hand. So what do you say? Will you take a chance on this? Maya looked at his outstretched hand. Weathered and lined, the hand of a man who'd built empires and was now offering to build something different. She thought about Clara, about the eviction notice, about falling asleep in class and working at the corner store until her body ached. She thought about her dreams of medical school, dreams she'd taught herself not to believe in because belief hurt too much when it couldn't come true. She thought about her mother, who she barely remembered, who died without ever seeing her daughter succeed. She thought about what Clara always said. Your mama always said you were special. You got a light in you, baby. Don't let this world dim it. Maybe this was the universe trying to keep that light burning. Maybe this was her chance to prove that good things could happen, that one act of kindness could ripple outward into something bigger than she could imagine. Or maybe it was all too good to be true and would fall apart and leave her more broken than before. But Maya had run toward a crashed car when everyone else had run away. She'd pushed on a dying man's chest until he gasped back to life. She'd returned a portfolio she could have sold. She'd already spent 13 years taking chances, making impossible choices, fighting against odds that should have crushed her. What was one more leap of faith? Maya reached out and took James Whitmore's hand. His grip was firm, warm, real. Not the grip of a man offering charity, but the grip of a man offering partnership. An unlikely partnership between a 13-year-old girl from the projects and a 67-year-old millionaire from a different world entirely, but a partnership nonetheless. Okay, Maya said, and her voice only shook a little. I'll try, but I need you to promise me something. Anything, James said. Promise me this is real. Promise me you're not going to disappear or change your mind or decide I'm not worth the investment. Because if I let myself hope, if I let myself believe this is possible, and then it gets taken away. She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't articulate the fear that hope would hurt worse than hopelessness ever had. James squeezed her hand, and Maya saw tears running down his cheeks. This powerful man crying on a curb outside a corner store in a neighborhood he'd probably never visited before. I promise you, Maya Rodriguez, on my life that you saved. This is real. I will not disappear. Will not change my mind. You are worth every bit of investment and more. And if I break this promise, you have my permission to find me and remind me that I'm being the man I used to be instead of the man I want to become. Maya laughed, surprising herself, and James laughed too. And for a moment they were just two people who'd found each other at exactly the right time, or maybe exactly the wrong time, or maybe there was no such thing as right or wrong timing and everything just happened the way it was supposed to. We should probably get up off this curb, Maya said. People are staring. Let them stare, James said. But he stood anyway, offering Maya his hand to pull her up. I want to meet your grandmother, if that's okay. I want to explain all of this to her. Make sure she's comfortable with everything. I know she probably doesn't trust me, and she has every reason not to. But I need her to understand that I'm serious about helping you. Maya thought about Clara, about how protective she was, about how suspicious she'd be of a rich white man making promises. But she also thought about how tired Clara was, how scared, how the weight of keeping them both afloat was slowly crushing a woman who'd already survived more than anyone should have to. Okay, Maya said, but fair warning. My grandmother doesn't take any nonsense. She's going to ask you hard questions, and she's going to know if you're lying. Good, James said. I respect that. I'd be worried if she just accepted this without question. They walked the 3 blocks to Maya's apartment building, an odd pair drawing stares and comments. James moved slowly, still healing, and Maya found herself unconsciously adjusting her pace to match his. When they reached the building with its broken elevator and graffitied walls, James didn't flinch or show disgust. He just looked at it the way you'd look at any building, any home, recognizing it for what it was. Shelter, however imperfect. They climbed the 4 flights of stairs, James pausing twice to catch his breath, his hand on his chest. Maya watched him carefully, ready to call 911 if he showed any signs of another heart attack. This man she'd saved once and would save again if needed. At apartment 4C, Maya unlocked the door with the key she wore on a string around her neck and called out, "Grandma, I brought someone to meet you." Clara emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and stopped dead when she saw James Whitmore standing in her doorway. Her eyes went wide, then narrow, assessing this stranger in her home. Maya saw her grandmother's posture straighten, saw dignity wrap around her like armor even though she was wearing a faded house dress and slippers with holes in them. "Mrs. Rodriguez," James said, and his voice was respectful, humble even. "My name is James Whitmore. I'm the man your granddaughter saved 3 weeks ago. I came to thank her properly and to ask if I might speak with both of you about something important." Clara looked at Maya, questioning. Maya nodded. "It's okay, Grandma. He wants to help." "Come in then," Clara said, and her voice carried the weight of every hard lesson she'd learned in 68 years of living. "But you'll understand if I'm cautious, Mr. Whitmore. Men with money and promises don't usually show up in neighborhoods like this unless they want something." "I do want something," James admitted, following her into the small living room. "I want the chance to help your granddaughter achieve her dreams. And I want her to help me remember how to be human again." Clara gestured for him to sit on the worn couch, and she took the armchair across from him. Maya perched on the arm beside her. The apartment was spotlessly clean despite its shabbiness. Everything organized and cared for. James noticed, Maya could tell. Noticed the medications lined up carefully on the kitchen counter. Noticed the textbooks stacked neatly by the door. Noticed the love and pride that had gone into making this small space a home. And then James Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Capital, worth $340 million, a man who'd crushed competitors and never lost a deal, proceeded to lay himself bare in front of 2 black women in a project's apartment. He told Clara everything. About growing up poor himself, about his mother who'd cleaned houses, about how he'd escaped poverty by becoming ruthless, about the wealth he'd accumulated and the humanity he'd lost. He told her about the heart attack, about Maya's CPR, about Richard's cruelty and his own shame. He told her about wanting to create a scholarship, a foundation, a legacy that actually meant something. "I can write you a check right now," James said. "Cover your rent, your medical bills, give you enough money to be stable for years. But that's not what I'm here to offer. I want to invest in Maya's future. I want to help her become the doctor she dreams of being. And I want her to help me understand how to give back properly, how to help communities like this one in ways that actually matter." Clara listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When James finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mr. Whitmore, I've lived in poverty my whole life. I've watched people with money make promises and disappear. I've seen programs start with big announcements and fold in 6 months. I've learned not to trust easy answers or rich people who suddenly discover poor people exist." James nodded. "You're right to be skeptical. But," Clara continued, "I've also learned to recognize genuine change when I see it. And I see something in you that looks like a man who's been shaken awake. My granddaughter saved your life, Mr. Whitmore. Not just physically, but in other ways you're probably still discovering. And if you're serious about helping her, if you're serious about keeping your promises, then I'll give you a chance. Not because I trust easily, but because Maya deserves every opportunity in the world, and I'll be damned if my pride gets in the way of her future." She leaned forward, fixing James with a stare that could cut glass. "But if you hurt her, if you disappoint her, if you make promises you don't keep, you'll answer to me. And I might be old and poor, but I promise you I'm scarier than any business rival you've ever faced. We clear?" James actually smiled, genuine and warm. "Crystal clear, Mrs. Rodriguez. And I respect you even more for saying it." They talked for hours after that, working out details. James had his lawyers draw up proper contracts, everything legal and documented. The scholarship would provide full tuition support, a stipend for books and supplies, money for test prep and college applications. The consultant position would pay $15 an hour, legitimate employment with taxes taken out and everything proper. Clara's medical bills would be paid as a signing bonus. The eviction crisis resolved immediately. It was all so much, so fast, that Maya felt dizzy trying to process it. One day she'd been 3 weeks from homelessness. The next day she had a scholarship and a job and a future that suddenly seemed possible. "There's one more thing," James said as he was preparing to leave. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "This is my personal cell phone number. Not my assistant's line, not a secretary, mine. If you need anything, if you have questions, if something goes wrong, you call me directly. Day or night. I mean that." Maya took the card with trembling hands. A direct line to a millionaire. Felt surreal. At the door, James paused and turned back. "Maya, I need you to understand something. This isn't me being generous or charitable. This is selfish. I need this as much as you do. Maybe more. You saved my life, and now I'm asking you to help me figure out what to do with it. We're in this together. Partners." "Understood." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. James left, and Maya and Clara sat in their small living room in stunned silence. Finally, Clara pulled her granddaughter into a fierce embrace. "Baby, I don't know if we should laugh or cry." "Both," Maya said, and they did, holding each other and laughing and crying and feeling the weight of years of struggle just starting to lift. What would you do if a millionaire showed up at your door with an offer like this? Would you trust it? Let us know in the comments below. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the business card on her nightstand. James Whitmore's personal number. A scholarship. A job. A future. It all felt like a dream she'd wake up from, finding herself back in the nightmare of bills and eviction notices and impossible choices. But when morning came, the business card was still there. The contracts James's lawyer had emailed were real. The check he'd left for immediate expenses didn't bounce. It was all real. Impossible, improbable, miraculous, but real. Maya got up, helped Clara with her medications, and made breakfast from cupboards that would soon be full because they could afford groceries now. She wrapped her textbooks in grocery bags from habit, then realized she wouldn't need to do that anymore. She could afford a real backpack. She could afford new textbooks if these ones fell apart. She could afford things she'd never been able to afford before. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, because now she had something to lose. Now she had hope, and hope was the most fragile, dangerous thing she'd ever held. If this fell apart, if James changed his mind, if it all turned out to be too good to be true, Maya wasn't sure she'd survive the disappointment. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, she had a scholarship and a job and a future. Today, she had a millionaire who'd looked at her and seen worth instead of poverty. Today, she had a chance. And Maya Rodriguez, 13 years old, poor, black, and from the projects, was going to take it. Richard Whitmore found out about his father's plans the way he found out about most things that happened in the family business. Through the lawyers. A junior associate at Morrison & Blake, the firm that handled all Whitmore Capital legal matters, had sent over draft documents for review. Scholarship fund establishment. Foundation charter. Employment contracts for a minor. Richard had been sitting in his corner office 43 floors above the city when the email arrived, and he'd read through the documents with growing disbelief that quickly crystallized into cold fury. His father was giving away money. Not to reputable charities with boards and oversight, not to institutions that would put the Whitmore name on buildings, but to some random kid from the projects. A scholarship fund with her as the primary beneficiary. A consulting position paying $15 an hour to a 13-year-old. Medical bill payments. Rent coverage. It was all there in black and white. Legally binding documents that would transfer significant family wealth to a stranger based on nothing more than a moment of crisis and his father's sudden sentimentality. Richard made 3 phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, asking about the legal standing of contracts signed by someone who'd recently had a heart attack and might not be thinking clearly. The second was to the family accountant, demanding to know how much money his father was planning to give away. The third was to his sister Jennifer, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Did you know about this?" Jennifer, who'd been expecting this call since the moment their father had announced his plans, kept her voice steady. "Yes, Richard. I know. And I support it." "You support our father being manipulated by a con artist?" "She's 13 years old and she saved Dad's life. She's not a con artist. She's a child who needs help. A child who conveniently shows up with Dad's portfolio, who conveniently has a sob story about eviction and medical bills, who conveniently managed to be the hero at exactly the right moment. You don't find any of that suspicious. Jennifer sighed, the sound of someone who'd had this argument before and knew it was pointless. No, Richard. I find it human. I find it decent. I find it the kind of thing Dad should have been doing for years instead of just accumulating more money he can't take with him. I'm coming over, Richard said, and hung up before Jennifer could respond. The Whitmore mansion sat on 5 acres in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, a monument to wealth that James had built 20 years ago during his most aggressive acquisition phase. Richard had his own key, let himself in without knocking, and found his father in the study, papers spread across the massive oak desk that had once belonged to a railroad baron. "We need to talk," Richard said, closing the door behind him with enough force that it echoed through the house. James looked up from the documents he'd been reviewing, contracts and foundation bylaws and scholarship requirements. He'd been expecting this conversation too, had been dreading it but knowing it was inevitable. "Hello, Richard." "Don't hello Richard me. What the hell are you doing?" Richard grabbed one of the contracts from the desk, waving it like evidence. "You're creating a scholarship fund for one specific person? You're hiring a 13-year-old as a consultant? You're paying medical bills for people you've never met? Have you lost your mind?" "I'm trying to help someone who deserves it," James said calmly, though his heart rate was climbing. The monitors the doctors had insisted he were registering his stress. "Help? Dad, she's playing you. This is exactly what these people do. They find vulnerable targets, they manufacture a crisis, they play on sympathy, and then they drain you dry. She probably knew who you were before the accident even happened. Probably staged the whole thing." James stood up, his voice hardening. "You think a 13-year-old girl staged my heart attack? Orchestrated a car crash? That's insane, Richard." "I think," Richard said coldly, "that she's a very smart opportunist who recognized a golden ticket when she saw one. And you're falling for it because you feel guilty about your own poor childhood and you're projecting all of that onto this stranger." Jennifer appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. "Richard, that's enough." "No, it's not enough," Richard shot back. "Someone needs to talk sense into him. Dad, you built this company through careful analysis, through due diligence, through never making decisions based on emotion. And now you're throwing money at a sob story without any verification, without any oversight, without considering that maybe, just maybe, you're being manipulated." "I've done my research," James said. "I know exactly who Maya Rodriguez is." "Do you? Do you really? Or do you know the story she's told you? The image she's presented? The persona she's constructed to get exactly what she wants?" Richard moved closer, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. "She's a con artist, Dad. This is exactly what they do. They find the emotional angle, they exploit it, and by the time you realize what's happening, they've taken you for everything." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. Not because he believed Richard, but because he recognized the tactic. This was Richard in negotiation mode, planting seeds of doubt, undermining confidence, creating space for his own agenda. "What do you want, Richard? I want you to think clearly. I want you to consider that you almost died, that you're on medication that affects your judgment, that you're making massive financial decisions based on emotion instead of logic. I want you to slow down, do proper due diligence, and make sure you're not being taken advantage of." "She saved my life," James said, his voice shaking. "She brought me back from death when no one else would even try. That's not manipulation, that's humanity." "And she's been rewarded for it," Richard countered. "You gave her $100. That's appropriate. But creating a foundation, paying medical bills, hiring her as a consultant, that's not gratitude, Dad. That's being conned." Jennifer stepped between them, her voice sharp. "Richard, you're out of line. Maya is a good kid who's struggling and deserves help. Dad finally wants to do something meaningful with his money, and you're attacking him for it." "I'm protecting him," Richard said. "Someone has to. You're both so caught up in this feel-good narrative that you can't see the obvious scam happening right in front of you." "It's not a scam," James said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Richard had always been good at this, at taking something solid and making it seem unstable, at introducing doubt where there should be confidence. "Prove it," Richard challenged. "Do a real background check. Not just the surface-level stuff your investigator gave you. Go deeper. Look at her family history, her grandmother's past, anything that might indicate this is more calculated than it appears. If she's genuine, the investigation will confirm it. If she's not, you'll know before you sign away family money." "This is ridiculous," Jennifer said. "She's 13 years old. 13-year-olds can be criminals too," Richard said coldly. "Age doesn't equal innocence, especially when there's this much money involved." James sat back down, suddenly feeling every one of his 67 years. The heart attack had taken more out of him than he'd admitted, and this confrontation was draining what little energy he'd recovered. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Richard sensed the opening, moved in for the close. "I'm suggesting you do proper due diligence before you commit to anything. Full background check on the girl and her grandmother. Financial history, criminal records if they exist, references from teachers and employers. Everything you do before hiring an executive or making a major investment. If she's who she says she is, great. Help her. But if there's anything questionable, anything at all, you need to know before you sign contracts that tie family money to people you barely know." Jennifer was shaking her head, disgusted. "You're talking about a child who saved our father's life like she's a hostile acquisition." "I'm talking about protecting family interests," Richard said, "which someone needs to do since you're apparently too busy being emotional to think straight." He turned back to James. "Dad, I'm asking you to be the man who built this empire. The man who never made a move without complete information. The man who never let sentiment override sense. Do the investigation. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize and support whatever you want to do. But if I'm right, if there's anything questionable in her background, you need to know now before you're legally committed." James closed his eyes, exhausted and conflicted. He believed in Maya. He did. But Richard had just voiced every doubt James had been pushing away since that moment on the curb outside Garcia's store. What if he was being manipulated? What if his near-death experience had made him vulnerable to exactly the kind of emotional appeal Richard was describing? What if 40 years of ruthless business sense was right and 3 weeks of sentimental redemption was wrong? "Fine," James said quietly. "I'll have a more thorough investigation done. But Richard, understand something. I want to be wrong. I want Maya to be exactly who she appears to be. And if she is, if this investigation confirms what I already believe, I expect you to apologize and support this foundation without reservation." "And if I'm right?" Richard asked. "Then I'll reconsider," James said, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Richard nodded, satisfied, and left without another word. Jennifer stayed, standing in front of her father's desk with tears of frustration in her eyes. "Dad, you're making a mistake. You know you are." "Maybe," James said, "or maybe Richard has a point. Maybe I am being too emotional, too quick to trust. I need to be sure, Jennifer, for my sake and for hers. If Maya is genuine, this investigation will prove it. And if she's not—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Jennifer left, and James sat alone in his study, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that suddenly felt empty. He called the private investigator, the same one who'd done the initial research, and asked for something more comprehensive. "I need everything," he said. "Full background on Maya Rodriguez and her grandmother Clara. Financial history, criminal records, school records, medical records if you can access them legally. Everything." The investigator, sensing the increased fee this request would generate, agreed immediately. "I'll have something for you in 72 hours. James hung up and sat in the dark study, feeling like he'd just betrayed something precious. But Richard's voice echoed in his head. This is exactly what they do. They play on sympathy. What if he was being played? What if his need for redemption had made him blind to manipulation? What if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life? 3 days later, Richard returned to the mansion with a file folder and an expression of grim satisfaction. He found James in the same study, looking older and more tired than he had days before. "The investigator's report," Richard said, dropping the folder on the desk. "You should read it before you sign anything." James opened the folder with trembling hands. Most of it was confirmation of what he already knew. Maya's poverty, her academic excellence, Clara's medical issues. But then, on page 7, he found what Richard had been looking for. Clara Rodriguez, arrest record from 30 years ago. Theft. She'd stolen food from a grocery store when she was 8 months pregnant and starving. The charges had been dropped after a sympathetic judge heard her circumstances, but the record existed. "That's your proof," James said, looking up at his son. "A desperate woman stealing food to feed herself and her unborn child 3 decades ago? It proves a pattern," Richard said. "Desperation leading to crime, taking what isn't theirs. And now, conveniently, the granddaughter shows up at exactly the right moment with exactly the right story. Doesn't that strike you as calculated?" "It strikes me as a grandmother who did what she had to do to survive," James said, but doubt crept into his voice despite himself. "People make mistakes when they're desperate." "Or," Richard said, "people learn that taking advantage of others is how you get ahead." "Dad, I'm not saying the girl is evil. I'm saying she's smart enough to recognize an opportunity when she sees one. And you're making it too easy." James stared at the arrest record, at the black and white documentation of Clara's lowest moment, and felt something crack inside him. What if Richard was right? What if he was being naive? What if his need for redemption was blinding him to warning signs any other businessman would have seen immediately? "I need to talk to her," James said finally. "I need to ask her about this directly." "That's exactly what you should do," Richard said, his voice gentler now that he'd won. "Ask her. Give her a chance to explain. But Dad, protect yourself. Don't sign anything until you're absolutely certain." James nodded, feeling sick, and Richard left looking satisfied. The next day, James showed up at Riverside Middle School during Maya's lunch period. He'd called ahead, spoken to the principal, explained that he needed to speak with one of their students about a family matter. The principal, recognizing the name James Whitmore and the potential for a significant donation, had agreed immediately and pulled Maya out of the cafeteria. Maya walked to the front office confused, worried that something had happened to Clara, and froze when she saw James sitting in the waiting area. He looked different than he had sitting on that curb outside Garcia's store. Stiffer, more formal. The warmth that had been in his eyes was replaced by something that looked like suspicion. "Mr. Whitmore? Is everything okay? Is it my grandmother?" "Clara's fine," James said, standing. "I just need to talk to you. Is there somewhere private?" The principal offered her office, and they sat across from each other in uncomfortable silence. Maya's stomach was churning. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air between them, in the way James wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Maya," James started, and his voice was different too. Not warm and grandfatherly like it had been in her apartment, but businessman cold, interrogative. "I need to ask you some questions about your grandmother." Maya's defenses shot up immediately. "What kind of questions?" "About her past, her history, things that might be relevant to our arrangement." "What arrangement?" Maya asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. The scholarship, the job, the foundation, all of it suddenly feeling precarious, like it was built on sand that was starting to shift. James pulled out a piece of paper, and Maya saw it was a photocopy of an old arrest record. Her grandmother's name, an address Maya didn't recognize. A charge, theft. "Did you know about this?" Maya stared at the paper, feeling like she'd been punched in the stomach. Someone had investigated them. Someone had dug into their past, looking for dirt, looking for reasons to doubt them. And they'd found Clara's lowest moment, the story Clara had told Maya years ago with tears in her eyes. The time she'd been so hungry and desperate that she'd stolen a loaf of bread and been caught and humiliated and terrified she'd lose her baby. "That was 30 years ago," Maya said, her voice shaking. "She was pregnant and starving and she took food. The charges were dropped." "But it happened," James said, and there was something in his voice that made Maya's blood run cold. "Doubt." He was doubting her, doubting Clara, doubting everything. I need to know I can trust you, Maya. I need to know that this isn't, that you're not. He couldn't finish the sentence, but Maya understood perfectly. Someone had convinced him she was a con artist, that she was using him, that her poverty and her struggles and her dreams were all just a carefully constructed lie designed to take advantage of a vulnerable old man. That I'm not what? Maya asked, her voice hardening. That I'm not a poor kid trying to scam a rich man? That my grandmother isn't a criminal? That we're not exactly what your son probably told you we are? James flinched. Richard has concerns. Valid concerns about making sure poor people know their place. Maya interrupted, standing up. Tears were forming in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of him. About making sure we don't get ideas above our station. About making sure we remember that people like you can investigate people like us and find our worst moments and use them as proof that we don't deserve help. That's not what this is, James said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Maya asked. You came to my apartment. You sat on a curb with me. You made promises about scholarships and foundations and helping my community. You said you wanted to invest in my future, that this was a partnership. And the first time someone plants doubt, the first time your rich son suggests maybe the poor black girl is running a con, you show up at my school with an arrest record from 3 decades ago and ask me to prove we're trustworthy. Hit that subscribe button right now because what Maya says next will leave you speechless. Maya, please, James said, standing. I just need to be careful. I need to make sure. You need to make sure what? That we're not criminals? That we deserve your charity? Because that's what this is, isn't it? Not a partnership. Not an investment. Charity that you can take away the second we don't meet your standards of worthiness. Maya was crying now, hot, angry tears that streamed down her face unchecked. You know what? Forget it. I don't need your money. I don't need your scholarship. I don't need some rich man who thinks I'm trying to con him just because I'm poor. I never said. You didn't have to say it. Maya's voice rose, and she didn't care that people in the front office could probably hear. You showed up with that paper. You asked me to prove my grandmother isn't a criminal. You made it clear that one arrest record from 30 years ago, from when she was desperate and hungry and trying to survive, is enough to make you doubt everything. To make you think maybe your son is right. Maybe we are just con artists playing on your sympathy. James looked stricken, reaching out to her. Maya, that's not. Don't, Maya said, stepping back. Don't touch me. Don't make more promises you're going to break the first time it gets complicated. My grandmother stole food when she was starving and pregnant. She was arrested and humiliated and let go because even the judge could see she was desperate. And she spent 30 years being the most honest, hardworking, decent person I know, raising me by herself after my mother died, sacrificing everything so I could have a chance. And you're standing here treating that one desperate moment like it's proof we're untrustworthy. I'm trying to be careful, James said weakly. No, Maya said, wiping her tears roughly. You're trying to protect yourself. You're trying to make sure you don't look foolish. You're trying to prove your son right instead of trusting your own judgment. And you know what? I don't blame you. We live in different worlds. You're right to be careful. You're right to doubt. Because people like us, we don't usually get happy endings with people like you. We get investigated and questioned and doubted, and then we get sent away. She walked toward the door, and James called after her. Maya, please, let me explain. Maya turned back, and the look on her face broke James's heart. It was the look of every hope dying, every dream crumbling, every moment of trust being revealed as foolish. You already explained everything, Mr. Whitmore. You explained that no matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, I'll always be the poor kid from the projects who probably has an angle. You explained that rich people's doubts matter more than poor people's reality. You explained that charity always comes with conditions, and the main condition is proving you're worthy of it over and over again. That's not fair, James said. No, Maya agreed. It's not fair. None of this is fair. But that's life, isn't it? You get to go back to your mansion and feel good about being careful and protecting yourself. And I get to go back to my apartment and explain to my grandmother that the miracle we thought was happening was just another false hope. We both do what we have to do. She left the office, left James standing there with the arrest record in his hand, and walked out of the school without asking permission. She just walked, tears streaming down her face, not caring that it was the middle of the day, or that she was supposed to be in class, or that truancy officers might stop her. She walked until she reached the projects, climbed the 4 flights of stairs, and collapsed on her bed, sobbing into her pillow. Clara found her there an hour later, still crying, and held her granddaughter while Maya told her everything. About James showing up at school, about the arrest record, about the doubt and the questions and the way it had all fallen apart. "Oh, baby," Clara said, tears in her own eyes. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. That stupid mistake I made when I was desperate." "It's not your fault," Maya said fiercely. "You did what you had to do to survive. There's no shame in that. The shame is on him for using it against us, for doubting us because of something that happened 30 years ago." They held each other in that small bedroom, 2 women who'd been knocked down so many times they'd learned to expect it, who'd let themselves hope for something better and were now paying the price for that hope. Back at Riverside Middle School, James stood in the principal's office, still holding the arrest record, and realized what he'd just done. He'd looked at a 13-year-old girl who'd saved his life and asked her to prove she wasn't a criminal because her grandmother had once been hungry enough to steal food. He'd taken Richard's suspicions and made them his own, doubting Maya not because of anything she'd done but because doubting felt safer than trusting. He'd made a terrible mistake. James walked slowly to his car, feeling older than he had before the heart attack, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. He thought about his own mother, who'd cleaned houses and worked herself to death. She'd stolen too once or twice, when there was no food and James was crying from hunger. She'd taken day-old bread from the bakery dumpster, technically theft even though it was garbage. She'd pocketed small items from the houses she cleaned when they were desperate, things their wealthy employers would never miss but that could be sold for enough to keep the electricity on. James had never judged his mother for those moments of desperation. He'd never thought of her as a criminal. He'd thought of her as a survivor, doing what she had to do to keep them alive. But when it was Maya's grandmother, when it was a black woman from the projects with an arrest record, he'd let Richard's voice override his own heart. He'd let fear override compassion. He'd let old business instincts override the new man he'd promised himself he'd become. He'd failed the test. And in failing, he'd proven everything Maya had accused him of. He was just another rich man who made promises he couldn't keep, who offered help but only to people who could prove they deserved it, who saw poverty as something shameful that needed to be explained and justified. James started the car and drove home, the arrest record on the passenger seat feeling like an accusation. When he arrived at the mansion, Jennifer was waiting. "What did you do?" she asked, seeing his face. "I made a terrible mistake," James said, and told her everything. Jennifer listened, her expression shifting from concern to disappointment to something like anger. "Dad, I love you, but what you just did, that was cruel. That girl trusted you. She let herself believe in something better. And you showed up at her school with her grandmother's worst moment and asked her to defend herself against your son's paranoia." "I know," James said miserably. "Do you? Do you really? Because Maya was right about everything she said. You did doubt her. You did treat her like she had to prove she was worthy of help. You did let Richard's voice matter more than your own judgment." Jennifer's voice was shaking. "That girl saved your life, Dad. She gave you a second chance. And this is how you repaid her. What do you think James should do now? Can he fix this? Let us know in the comments." James sat in his study that night, unable to sleep, replaying every word of that conversation. Maya's tears, her anger, her heartbreak, the way she'd looked at him like he'd confirmed every terrible thing she'd ever learned about trusting people with power. He picked up his phone a dozen times to call her, to apologize, to try to explain. But what could he say? "I'm sorry I doubted you because your grandmother was once desperate enough to steal food. I'm sorry I let my son convince me you were running a con. I'm sorry I treated you like a potential threat instead of the child who saved my life. There were no words that would fix this. He'd broken something precious, something that couldn't be repaired with apologies or explanations or even more money. He'd broken trust. He'd broken hope. He'd broken a 13-year-old girl's belief that good things could happen, that people could be trusted, that the world could be different than it had always been. James Whitmore, the man who never lost, had just lost the most important thing he'd ever been given: a chance at redemption. And he didn't know if he'd ever get another one. James Whitmore sat in his study until midnight, the arrest record still on his desk like an accusation, Jennifer's words echoing in his head. "That girl saved your life, Dad, and this is how you repaid her." He'd picked up his phone 17 times to call Maya, and 17 times he'd set it back down, knowing that a phone call wouldn't be enough, knowing that words alone couldn't fix what he'd broken, knowing that if he wanted any chance at redemption, he'd have to do what Maya had done for him: run toward the hard thing instead of away from it. At 12:30 a.m., James got in his car and drove to the Riverside projects. The neighborhood looked different at night, streetlights casting pools of amber illumination, while others flickered or stayed dark. He'd never been in this area after dark, had certainly never ventured into these buildings when most sensible people were home behind locked doors. But James wasn't here for safety or comfort. He was here because he'd made a terrible mistake and needed to face it, needed to face the girl he'd hurt, needed to at least try to explain even if she never forgave him. He parked on the street, ignoring the looks from a group of teenagers on a corner who were definitely wondering what this old white man in an expensive car was doing in their neighborhood at this hour. He locked the car knowing it might get broken into, accepting that as the price of his redemption, and walked to the building he'd visited just days before when everything had still seemed possible. The elevator was still broken. James climbed the 4 flights of stairs, his chest aching, his ribs protesting, his doctor's voices in his head warning him about physical exertion. But he kept climbing, pausing on each landing to catch his breath, until he reached the 4th floor and stood outside apartment 4C. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. It was nearly 1 in the morning. They were probably asleep. He should come back tomorrow at a reasonable hour when he could think clearly and say the right things. He should. A sound stopped him. Soft crying, coming from outside. James followed the sound to a window at the end of the hallway, and through it, he saw the fire escape. And on that fire escape, silhouetted against the city lights, sat Maya. She was curled up against the railing, knees pulled to her chest, crying with the kind of broken sobs that come from the deepest part of the soul. The kind of crying that happens when you're alone and think no one can hear, when you finally let out all the pain you've been holding inside. James's heart shattered watching her, knowing he was the cause of this pain, knowing his doubt and fear had reduced this brave, brilliant girl to this. He opened the window as quietly as he could and climbed out onto the fire escape. The metal creaked under his weight, and Maya's head snapped up, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. For a second, they just stared at each other. The old man who'd failed and the young girl he'd failed. Then Maya's expression hardened. "Go away," she said, her voice rough from crying. "I can't," James said. "Not until you hear me out. I already heard everything you had to say. The school. With that arrest record. I don't need to hear any more." James moved carefully along the fire escape, his body protesting every step, until he was close enough to sit down a few feet from her. Maya didn't move away, but she didn't move closer either. She just watched him with eyes that held more hurt than anger, which somehow made it worse. "I'm sorry," James said, and the words felt inadequate even as he spoke them. "I'm so sorry, Maya. I let fear and my son's paranoia make me forget who you are. I let old instincts override new understanding. I made you prove yourself when you'd already proven everything by saving my life." Maya hugged her knees tighter but didn't respond. "Let me tell you a story," James continued, looking out at the city lights instead of at her because it was easier to confess to the darkness. "When I was 8 years old, my mother got arrested for theft. She'd stolen food from a grocery store just like your grandmother did. Bread and milk and eggs. Basic things we needed because we hadn't eaten in 2 days. The store owner caught her, called the police, and I had to watch them put handcuffs on my mother while I stood there crying and scared. James heard Maya's breathing change, heard her listening even though she hadn't moved. The judge let her go with a warning, just like with your grandmother. But something happened to me that day. I decided I would never, ever be powerless again. I would never be so poor that my mother had to steal food. I would never be the kind of person who could be handcuffed and humiliated. I would claw my way out of poverty. And I would build walls so high that hunger and desperation could never touch me again. He turned to look at Maya now, and she was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. And I did it, James said. I fought and scraped and studied and worked until I made my first $1, then my first 1,000, then my first $1,000,000. And with every dollar I built my walls higher. I became ruthless because ruthless meant powerful and powerful meant safe. I crushed competitors because it was them or me. I made deals that hurt people because profit mattered more than people. I forgot that I'd started this journey because my mother couldn't afford bread. I forgot what desperation felt like. I forgot how to be human. His voice cracked on the last word, and Maya saw tears streaming down his face. This powerful man crying on a fire escape in the projects. I built an empire, James continued, but I lost my humanity. I gave money to opera houses and art museums because those donations made me look cultured and sophisticated. They got my name on plaques in marble lobbies. But I never gave money to free clinics or food banks or programs that actually helped people like my mother, like your grandmother, like you. Because helping people like that would mean remembering where I came from, and I'd spent 40 years trying to forget. Why are you telling me this? Maya asked, her voice small. Because you gave me both a second chance at life and a second chance at being human, James said. When you saved me on that street, you didn't just restart my heart. You reminded me of who I used to be. You showed me what I'd lost in my climb to the top. You made me remember that compassion matters more than profit, that humanity matters more than power. He moved a little closer, and Maya didn't pull away. And then I almost threw it all away, James said, his voice heavy with shame. My son planted doubt, showed me that arrest record, and instead of seeing a desperate woman 30 years ago doing what she had to do to survive, I saw a potential threat. I let fear override compassion. I treated you like a business risk instead of the child who saved my life. I became exactly the man I'd spent 40 years being instead of the man I'd promised myself I'd become. You hurt me, Maya said simply. You made me believe things could be different, and then you proved they couldn't. I know, James said, and I can't undo that. I can't take back showing up at your school with that record. I can't erase the doubt or the questions or the pain I caused. All I can do is tell you the truth. I was wrong. Richard was wrong. You're not a con artist. Your grandmother isn't a criminal. You're two people who've survived impossible circumstances with your dignity and humanity intact, which is more than I can say for myself. Make sure you hit that subscribe button because what happens next will restore your faith in second chances. Maya was quiet for a long time, looking out at the city. Finally, she spoke. My grandmother told me something after you left. She said that sometimes people fail tests not because they're bad people, but because they're scared people. She said you were scared of being fooled, scared of being seen as weak, scared of trusting the wrong person. She said fear makes people do ugly things. Your grandmother is a wise woman, James said. She also said, Maya continued, that how people respond after they fail the test matters more than failing it. She said everyone messes up. The question is whether they run away from the mess or try to clean it up. James felt something like hope stirring in his chest. I don't want to run away, Maya. I want to clean it up. But I don't know if I can. I don't know if you can trust me again after what I did. I don't know either, Maya admitted. But I'm sitting here listening instead of telling you to leave. So that's something. They sat in silence for a moment, and then James said quietly, I don't want to just give you money, Maya. That was never what this was supposed to be about. I want you to show me how to give back properly. You know this community. You know what people need, what actually helps versus what just makes rich people feel good about themselves. I want you to teach me how to help the right way. Not as charity but as partnership. Real partnership, where your voice matters as much as mine. Maya looked at him, searching his face for sincerity, for truth, for some sign that this wasn't just more empty words. And she saw something there that hadn't been there before. Humility. Genuine humility from a man who'd probably never been humble in his life. If we do this, Maya said slowly, it has to be different than before. No more investigations. No more tests of whether I'm worthy. No more doubting me every time things get complicated. You have to actually trust me, even when it's scary. I will, James promised. I do. I'm done letting fear run my life. I'm done being the man who sees threats instead of opportunities. I'm done being the person I was and ready to become the person you showed me I could be. Maya nodded slowly, and James saw the first crack in her defensive walls. Okay, we can try again. But Mr. Whitmore, if you hurt me again, if you doubt me again, I'm done. I can't keep having my heart broken by people who promise to be different and then aren't. Then I won't, James said. I promise you, Maya Rodriguez, I will not break your heart again. And if I do, you have my permission to walk away and never look back. They sat on that fire escape for another hour, talking about what the foundation could be, what the community needed, how they could work together to make real change. And slowly, carefully, they rebuilt the trust that James had shattered. It wasn't the same as before. It was more cautious, more aware of how fragile trust could be. But it was real and it was theirs. When James finally climbed back through the window and made his way down the 4 flights of stairs, his chest aching and his body exhausted, he felt lighter than he had in days. He'd failed the test, yes, but Maya had given him another chance to pass it. And this time he wouldn't waste it. 6 months passed like a dream, like a miracle, like proof that sometimes the universe does balance the scales. Maya thrived in school, her grades shooting back up to straight A's, her teachers amazed by the transformation. She had a new laptop, new textbooks, new clothes that fit properly. She had the scholarship James had promised, all properly documented and legal, money deposited monthly into an account that would grow over the years. She had the consulting job, $15 an hour for 8 hours a week, helping design programs for the foundation James had created. The Second Chances Foundation wasn't like other foundations. It didn't fund opera houses or art museums or things that looked good on paper but didn't help real people. Instead, it opened a medical clinic in the heart of the Riverside projects, offering free and low-cost care to anyone who walked through the doors. It started after-school programs where kids could get homework help, hot meals, and mentorship. It funded scholarships for students like Maya, brilliant kids who just needed someone to believe in them. It provided job training and placement services, helping people get legitimate work instead of having to survive on under-the-table cash jobs. And Maya was at the center of it all, the voice that kept them honest. When James suggested a program that sounded good but wouldn't actually help, Maya told him so. When consultants presented plans that ignored what the community really needed, Maya pushed back. She brought her friends to focus groups. She talked to Mr. Garcia and Clara and Mr. Patterson about what would make a difference. She made sure the foundation didn't just throw money at problems but actually solve them. Clara's health stabilized with consistent medication and regular doctor visits at the new clinic. The eviction crisis was over, the apartment secure, the refrigerator always full. Maya could breathe for the first time in her life, could focus on school and dreams instead of just survival. She was still the same person, still kind and hardworking and brilliant, but now she had space to be those things without the crushing weight of poverty pressing down on every moment. James was different too. He'd stepped back from the ruthless business dealings that had defined his life, putting Richard in charge of Whitmore Capital while he focused on the foundation. Richard had accepted this with barely concealed satisfaction, probably thinking his father was having a prolonged mental health crisis that would eventually pass. But James didn't care what Richard thought anymore. He'd spent 40 years making Richard's kind of money. Now he wanted to spend whatever time he had left making Maya's kind of difference. He and Maya met twice a week at the foundation office they'd opened in the Riverside projects, a modest space in a renovated building, nothing fancy but functional and welcoming. They'd plan programs, review applications, visit families who needed help. James listened more than he talked now, learning from Maya instead of teaching her. She showed him her world, and he showed her his, and together they built something neither of them could have created alone. Jennifer had joined them, leaving her own corporate job to become the foundation's operations director. She and Maya had become close, Maya seeing in Jennifer the older sister she'd never had. Jennifer seeing in Maya the reminder of why they did this work. Even Mr. Patterson had gotten involved, helping design the education programs, amazed by what was possible when money met genuine need. And Destiny, the girl who'd mocked Maya's clothes and situation, had been one of the first students to benefit from the after-school program. Her younger brother got homework help that improved his grades dramatically. Destiny herself got a part-time job at the community center, saving money for college. She'd apologized to Maya properly, with tears and genuine remorse, and Maya had forgiven her because she understood now that hurt people, and healed people heal people. The foundation was changing the neighborhood, one family at a time, one program at a time. Hope was returning to streets that had forgotten what it looked like. Kids had opportunities their parents never had. People who'd been written off by society were being seen and valued and helped. On a bright Saturday morning 6 months after that conversation on the fire escape, the Second Chances Foundation held an official launch ceremony at the community center. The place was packed with families from the neighborhood, kids from the after-school programs, teachers, social workers, nurses from the new clinic, everyone whose lives had been touched by what Maya and James had built together. Maya sat in the front row with Clara on one side and Mr. Patterson on the other. Destiny sat 2 rows back with her family, her little brother waving at Maya with a gap-toothed grin. The community center had been renovated with foundation money, the walls freshly painted, new floors installed, a stage built for events like this. It was beautiful in its simplicity, nothing fancy or expensive looking, just a clean, welcoming space where people felt they belonged. James stood at the podium, looking older than he had 6 months ago, moving more slowly, his heart condition progressing despite the medications and treatments. Everyone knew he was dying, though no one talked about it directly. The doctors had given him 6 months to a year, and he'd already used half of that time building something that would outlast him. 6 months ago, James began, his voice strong despite his body's weakness. I nearly died. My heart stopped, and I was slipping away into whatever comes next. I'd lived 67 years, built a successful company, accumulated more money than I could ever spend, and in that moment when I was dying, none of it mattered. The buildings with my name on them, the business deals I'd won, the empire I'd built, all of it felt empty and meaningless. The room was silent, everyone listening. And then a 13-year-old girl ran toward me when everyone else ran away, James continued, his eyes finding Maya in the front row. She brought me back to life with her own hands, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, just doing what was right because it was right. And in that moment, she didn't just save my life. She saved my soul. Maya felt tears prickling behind her eyes. Maya Rodriguez showed me what I'd lost in my climb to the top, James said. She reminded me that compassion matters more than profit, that humanity matters more than power, that the point of success isn't accumulating wealth but using that wealth to help people who need it. She taught me that it's never too late to change, never too late to become the person you should have been all along. James paused, emotion thickening his voice. This foundation isn't my legacy. It's ours. Mine and Maya's and everyone in this community who believed we could do something better, something real. We've opened a medical clinic that's already served over 500 patients. We've started after-school programs helping 200 kids. We've funded scholarships for 30 students. We've helped 50 families avoid eviction and connected 100 people with job training and employment. And we're just getting started. The room erupted in applause, and Maya saw Clara crying beside her, proud and overwhelmed. Mr. Patterson squeezed Maya's shoulder. Destiny was clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. But more than the numbers, James said when the applause died down. We've proven something important. We've proven that when you actually listen to communities instead of assuming you know what they need, when you partner with people instead of treating them as recipients of charity, when you value dignity as much as dollars, real change is possible. We've proven that the people living in poverty aren't the problem, poverty is the problem. And when you give people resources and respect and opportunity, There's nothing they can't achieve. He looked directly at Maya again. Thank you, Maya, for saving my life. Thank you for teaching an old man new tricks. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Brilliant, compassionate, brave, and unwilling to accept that the world can't be better than it is. This foundation is my second chance. You made it possible. More applause, and Maya was crying openly now, Clara holding her hand tightly. The ceremony continued with speeches from the clinic director, from teachers whose students were thriving, from parents whose lives had been changed. Maya herself spoke, her voice shaking but strong, talking about what it meant to be seen and valued, to have someone believe in you, to get a chance to prove what you could do when survival wasn't consuming every moment of every day. Afterward, as people mingled and celebrated, James found Maya near the refreshment table. "Can we take a walk?" he asked. Maya nodded, and they slipped outside into the afternoon sunshine. They walked slowly, James moving carefully, Maya matching his pace, through the neighborhood that looked different now. The medical clinic sign gleamed in the light. The after-school program building bustled with activity even on a Saturday. Gardens that the foundation had funded were starting to bloom, vegetables growing in empty lots where trash had once accumulated. "Look at this," James said, gesturing to the transformed neighborhood. 6 months ago, none of this existed, and now it's real. It's happening. People are being helped. "Because of you," Maya said. "Because of us," James corrected. "I had the money, but you had the vision. You had the understanding of what actually needed to happen. Without you, I'd have thrown money at the wrong things and felt good about myself while changing nothing." They stopped at the corner where James's car had crashed 6 months ago, where Maya had performed CPR on this dying stranger, where everything had changed in a single impossible moment. The lamppost had been repaired. The street looked normal now, no evidence of the accident that had altered both their lives irrevocably. "Maya," James said, turning to face her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "I need to tell you something. The doctors say I probably have 3 months left. Maybe less. My heart is giving out despite everything they're trying." Maya felt like she'd been punched. No, you just got here. We just started." "Hey," James said gently, pulling her into a hug. "Listen to me. I'm not afraid. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of death. Because I know I've done something that matters. Because I know the foundation will continue after I'm gone, Jennifer, and you will keep it going. Keep expanding it. Keep helping people. Because I know my life meant something more than just making money." Maya buried her face in his shoulder, crying, this girl who'd lost so many people already now losing another one. "Thank you for saving my life twice," James whispered into her hair, holding her close. "Once on that street, when you brought my heart back to life, and once from the man I'd become, when you showed me how to be human again." He pulled back slightly, looking into her tear-stained face, and said the words he'd been carrying since that day in the hospital, the words he tried to say when he was too weak and medicated to get them out, the words that explained everything. "You're the daughter I wish I'd raised," James whispered, his voice breaking. "If I could go back and do everything differently, I'd want to raise a daughter exactly like you. Brave and kind and brilliant and compassionate. You're everything I should have been and wasn't. You're the legacy I actually want to leave behind. And I'm so proud of you, Maya. I'm proud of who you are and who you're becoming. I'm proud to know you. I'm proud to call you my partner, my friend, my family." Maya broke down completely, sobbing against his chest, hearing the words every child needs to hear from a parent figure. "I'm proud of you." James held her while she cried, this unlikely pair who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, who'd saved each other in ways neither had fully understood at the time. "I love you," Maya said through her tears. "I know we've only known each other 6 months, but I love you. You're the grandfather I never had. Your family. I love you too," James said, his own tears falling freely. "You're my family, the family I chose, the family I earned by finally becoming worthy of it." They stood there on that corner where everything had changed, holding each other in the afternoon light, and anyone watching might have seen an odd pair. An elderly white millionaire and a young black girl from the projects. But what they really were was family. Not family by blood, but family by choice, by struggle, by transformation. Family because they'd saved each other's lives and then figured out how to live those saved lives in ways that mattered. 3 months later, James Whitmore died peacefully in his sleep, Jennifer and Maya sitting on either side of his bed. His last words were "thank you," whispered to no one and everyone, gratitude for the second chance he'd been given, gratitude for the girl who'd made it possible, gratitude for a life that had finally, in its last chapter, meant something more than profit and power. The funeral was held at the community center, not in some fancy funeral home. The neighborhood came out in force. Hundreds of people whose lives James had touched through the foundation. Maya gave the eulogy, her voice steady despite her grief, talking about second chances and redemption, and how it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. The Second Chances Foundation continued, growing stronger every year. Maya stayed on as youth advisor through high school, then went to college on a full scholarship, then to medical school just like she'd dreamed. She became the kind of doctor who opened a practice in underserved neighborhoods, who treated patients who couldn't afford insurance, who remembered where she came from and never stopped giving back. Years later, when Maya had her own daughter, she named her Clara James, honoring both the grandmother who'd raised her and the grandfather who'd chosen her. She told her daughter the story of how a 13-year-old girl had saved a millionaire's life and in return he'd given her the world, how one moment of compassion had rippled outward into generations of change, how sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect, and sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. The Second Chances Foundation now serves over 50,000 families across multiple cities. The Riverside Project's neighborhood has been transformed, poverty reduced by 40%, graduation rates up 80%, health outcomes dramatically improved. There's a statue in front of the original medical clinic. A 13-year-old girl and an elderly man sitting on a curb, an unlikely pair who changed the world by changing each other. And every year on the anniversary of that car crash, Maya visits James's grave and tells him about the foundation's work, about the lives being changed, about the second chances being given to people who desperately need them. She tells him she's proud of him too, proud that he found the courage to change, proud that he became the man he was always meant to be. "Thank you," she always says at the end, echoing his last words. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for showing me that good people exist and sometimes they find each other exactly when they're supposed to." And in the whisper of wind through the trees, in the warmth of sunlight on her face, Maya sometimes swears she can hear his response. "Thank you for saving my life twice. I love you, Maya. I'm proud of you. I'll always be proud of you." Some stories are about heroes saving the day. Some stories are about villains getting their comeuppance. But this story is about something more powerful than either of those things. This story is about two broken people who found each other in a moment of crisis and decided to help each other heal. About a girl who saved a man's life and a man who saved a girl's future. About how compassion can transform both the giver and the receiver. About how it's never too late to change, never too late to choose humanity over profit, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. This is the story of Maya Rodriguez and James Whitmore, two people from different worlds who built a bridge between those worlds and showed that love and second chances and genuine partnership can change everything. And that's a story worth telling. What's a second chance you've been given or given someone else? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story moved you, make sure you're subscribed because there are more incredible stories of hope and transformation coming your way.